Welcome back. Well, now that we've seen how to work with some very simple tab rotation as I have in this little slide tab system that we implemented, I'm now going to show you something that a lot of my students are often asking me about, and that is how to replicate the overlay effect that you oftentimes would see with regards to a gallery or any kind of picture that you want to be working with so that you'd have a much more larger version of that picture available. And you'll notice that in the final files that I have available for you, you'll notice that on the home page we did implement this slide tab system here, but if you click on the link called overlay, you'll see that it's really just the same design as before. The only difference is I've placed 3 pictures right here, and these 3 pictures, when we roll over them, we click on them, they will open up a window that is perfectly centered in the middle of our screen, and there's really not much going on here with regards to graphics as well. All the shadow effects are being taken care of with CSS3, and the box is just a div, a container of sorts. The only graphics that are being used in here are obviously the picture graphic that I have here. Some text will accompany it, and this small little X graphic, which you can customize and make look however you would like it to look. So when we click on that, close it, here's a second one, and here's a third one. So what I'm going to be talking to you about then is showing you how to work with all of these elements and how to apply the overlay tool from the jQuery tools library. So what do we do? Well, if you head on over to the jQuery tools library, and if you're looking at the demos, or even if you're on the home page and you just click on overlay down here and you want to see what the overlay looks like, there's a lot of different types of overlays that you can be using for eye candy, for presentations, for interactions, as it says here. And very simple usage. I'm going to be talking to you about that, and we're going to be looking at the basic minimal setup because that's the one that's going to pretty much do what we want it to do, and I'll be showing you how exactly to set that up. So there are a number of graphics available if you did want to work with those graphics, but as I mentioned to you earlier, the only thing that we're going to be really using is the little button that comes with it. Now I've provided you that button if you're following along with the downloaded files, and one of the things that you'll see inside of the either progress or the finished file in images, you'll also notice that there is a folder called overlay. Now I've included all the different files that you're going to be wanting to experiment with, and you can take a look at them. There's gray backgrounds and red backgrounds, and these will deal with any of the variations. The Apple effect is kind of a fun one, and there's a lot of other things, multiple overlays on the same page. There's a lot of different demos that you can look at, but I think just running you through the minimal setup will allow you to then further explore some of these more sophisticated methods. But even so, the minimal setup's a pretty nice one, and that's why we're going to be looking at that. So the only graphic I really need, even though I've given you a bunch of graphics, the only one I really need is the close graphic, and that's the close button right here, close PNG. It's the one we're going to be using. Now, if you wanted to change that, just have to take note of the dimensions, 36 by 36, and then just make whatever you want. So it's really customizable. There's a lot of different things that you can do with it. All right, so with that in place, all we really need to do is to go back to our text editor, whatever text editor you're working with, and you'll notice here, well, I've got 2 open. I've got the finished file, and this one is the progress file. So if you look at the progress file, if you open up the progress file, you'll see that I have, and just to let you know here in the Finder, you'll see the finished, and here's the progress. And in the progress, we've been building up the index page so that it looks like it has the slide tabs, the way I showed you how to implement them. But now I've added an overlay file. So let's open up this overlay HTML file from the progress. And once you're in that area, then we can now start to work on this particular file. Now you'll also notice that I've included on the index page a link to the overlay, and as you'll see if we return to your text editor, here's a link on the overlay page going back to the index, so you can flip between them. But on the index page itself, I have a link to the overlay. So at this point, with overlay HTML open, there's really not much going on inside here. It's been stripped down and it doesn't have any of the graphics that we'll need. But if you remember in the final version, and here is the final version, you'll notice that right in the article tab, we have a simple lorem ipsum headline and then 3 images. And then after that, I just have the very same information that we had on the index page, subheadline with some text and whatnot. So if we return here, you'll notice that I've left a blank space for you so that you can insert the information that we're going to need to make this work. All right, so first and foremost, let's address some of the HTML that we're going to need to make this actually end up working. So right after this little H2 lorem ipsum headline inside the article, first thing I want to do is to add the simple graphics, the simple thumbnail graphics that we're going to be using to click on to open up our overlay effect. So we're going to call these triggers, and I'm going to start just by applying a little HTML code here, and I'll say trigger elements. Okay, so in this area, we are now going to create a simple div. And this div is going to be given an ID, and that ID is going to be called, actually here I'm just going to come in here, ID, and we're going to call this ID triggers. Pretty simple name to remember. Works for us. Before we do anything else though, I'm going to just come in here and close that div. I don't want to get confused with which div belongs to which and which closing belongs to what. So within these divs is where we're going to be placing our 3 images. So let's just put in the first one and then we'll copy the next one. So here is an IMG tag, and the source for that IMG tag, and I could use Dreamweaver to do this, but here I'll just run it through with you. We're just going to say source equals, and we'll say, remember this is the overlay, and right next to the overlay, see I didn't put the overlay inside of a folder or anything like that, so right next to it is the images, just as right next to it is the CSS. So all we really need to do in this case is to write images / remember, all of the images that we're going to be needing for the overlay is inside the images folder, but I also have a folder called overlay, and it's in here that we need these thumbnail pictures. So we're going to say images overlay and another / and here my names of these images are frog thumb, as in thumbnail, 1.jpg. Right? Now we don't necessarily even need to give it a width and a height or anything like that, but if you wanted to, the width is set to 220, and then we could come in here and we could also say height, and the height is also set to 220. But you'll notice a couple of things. I had to make some adjustments. I think 210 would be actually more appropriate, so that's something that we can consider as well. Now, I'm going to remove the width and the height because, as you'll see, you don't really need it in every case. And in this case, all I'm going to add is an attribute called rel. And rel is sort of like a relationship between a certain image and something else. But it's the rel attribute that we're going to be using to actually get the JavaScript to work for us. So I'm going to give it a rel, and in this case I'm just going to call it frog1. You can call it whatever you want, change it, do whatever you need. Now I'll just put in this information right there. Again, we don't need a self-containing image the way we have here, so technically speaking, if we're writing in HTML5, I could just do it this way, and that should be fine. Now, if I were to just save this briefly and preview it in our browser, you'll see, oh yeah, just simple image, and it's already 220 by 220, although I kind of fudged up on some of the sizes, although because it's perfectly the same width and height, if we make some adjustments, as long as the width and height are the same, we should be fine. So, as you can see, that's the first one. I'm going to ask you to copy this information, and we'll just paste it in here twice. All we really need to do is to change thumb1 to thumb2, thumb3, and we'll change the relationship name from frog1 to frog2 and frog3.